his hand, Moses did not know when the skin of his face shone, because he had been talking with God. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, the skin of his face was shining, and they were afraid to come near him. So Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the leaders of the congregation returned to him, and Moses spoke with them. Afterward, all the Israelites came near, and he gave them in commandment all that the Lord had spoken with him on Mount Sinai. When Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. But whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he would take the veil off until he came out. And when he came out and told the Israelites what he had been commanded, the Israelites would see the face of Moses, and the skin of his face was shining. And Moses would put the veil on his face again when he went in to speak with him. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory, and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my Son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. On the next day, when they had come down from the mountain, a great crowd met them. Just then a man from the crowd shouted, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son. He is my only child." Suddenly a spirit seizes him, and all at once he shrieks. It convulses him until he foams at the mouth. It mauls him and will scarcely leave him. I begged your disciples to cast it out, but they could not. Jesus answered, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you and bear with you? Bring your son here." While he was coming, the demon dashed him to the ground in convulsions. But Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And all were astounded at the greatness of God. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And all of us with unveiled faces, seeing the glory of the Lord as though reflected in a mirror, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, the Spirit. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts bless you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
Please be seated. I am constantly amazed on a daily basis of the wonders of this universe that we continue to discover. Wonders that recently no one was even aware of. One of the things that has been discovered in just the last few years is that the world continues both inward and outward in complexity. Until recently, science believed that if you went inward microscopically, things became simpler and would in fact stop going eventually. Well, the reality is, like the most recent Ant-Man movies, if you follow Marvel at all, completely different. There are worlds within worlds within worlds. Now imagine, if you can, a time in which modern civilization had not explored the world and did not even know what was on the other side of the world. As I have related recently, I began to seriously investigate my ancestry this last year. Among my family, I recently discovered Sir Francis Drake, my great-uncle. Francis was, according to Wikipedia, an English sea captain, a privateer, which is an official pirate, a slave trader, although I would note that it was mostly the rest of the family that were involved in that kind of stuff, a naval officer, and an explorer of the Elizabethan era. He was a significant individual in the conflicts and events of England in the midst of the 1500s. He was eventually knighted and rose to the rank of admiral. But what I found most fascinating about him was that he was only the second person at that time in history to circumnavigate the globe. And he was the first to do so as a captain and leader of the expedition. He was also the earliest English explorer to actually reach the west coast of the Americas and to see the Pacific Ocean. What was it like to see places that no one from your country had ever visited? His explorations revealed knowledge of the world that was unknown at the time and would establish a foundation and guide for future explorations. Now, as marvelous as the findings of our current scientific research is today, those findings are limited by the current scientific philosophy and technology. In recent years, there has been a shift in science to only accept as fact those things that can be confirmed by our senses and by our equipment. If something cannot be confirmed, then as far as science is concerned, it does not exist. This has raised significant doubt as to the nature of spiritual things, life after death, and many other things. Despite the doubts, there continue to be reports of things that science cannot explain. Apparently no one's told them. For years I have worked on a midnight shift, and to keep myself awake, I would listen to this radio show called Coast to Coast AM. It was originally hosted by a man by the name of Art Bell. Now, the show brought on guests. They discussed a wide variety of topics, but many of them involved paranormal activity. The show was a constant reminder that the universe is a vast and mysterious thing, and that much of it is not subject to explanation. I should say that the show still is on, it just has a different host nowadays. I did in fact stay awake most often because I did not want to close my eyes after I had heard many of the things they were talking about. I used to have these discussions with some of my fellow agents, and yeah, you were quite awake after watching the show. As Shakespeare notes in Hamlet, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Now, I don't remember if Art Bell talked about the transfiguration of Jesus, but he often brought up the topic of religion and Jesus. I suppose that Peter was trying to find a way to memorialize that moment when he suggested the dwellings. Now, it sounds funny for him to suggest these 3 dwellings, but you have to understand, he just had his complete understanding of the universe uprooted. I mean, what would any of us do if we were approached by the unknown? Perhaps if radio had existed back then, when Peter existed, then he and the others might have provided an interview of what they had experienced. It is enough to say that they experienced something that few people, even those in the Bible, ever experienced. Even the Israelites were afraid of Moses when he came down from meeting with God on the mountain. Who had ever seen someone with a glowing face? And the disciples, they heard the voice of God out loud. But they did not doubt their senses. It was enough that they had experienced. There was nothing else for them to prove. Perhaps the Israelites believed what they experienced because they actually knew Moses. Okay, yeah, he's got a shiny face, but it's still Moses, right? And for Peter, James, and John, here they are, finding themselves face to face with Moses, Elijah, and Jesus, and they're all glowing. But, wait a minute, we've been following Jesus around for years, right? It's the same Jesus. Yes, it was something from beyond, but it was connected to a reality that they knew. Lauren Daigle, a current award-winning Christian singer, wasn't always so confident in her faith. In her teens, she became very ill, seeming overnight to lose all of her energy and her stamina. Fearing at the least a common ailment for teenagers, mononucleosis, right? Her parents took her to the doctor only to find out that she had this supercharged variant, cytomegalovirus. And it would keep her in bed or on her couch for the next 2 years, trying to gain her strength back. My youngest daughter suffered from the common form of mono. And for her, it was just a fight to finish her last year of high school. I cannot imagine what it was like to have to experience that for over 2 years. It is enough to say that Lauren became depressed and truly doubted God's love for her. But she never quite gave up. At a very low point, she asked for God's encouragement. And one morning, as she walked into her bathroom and peered into the mirror, she was given this series of visions, one right after the other. And, right now, she couldn't even write down the words to songs, let alone sing them. But here in this image, she saw herself standing on a stage singing to thousands of people. What did all this mean? She didn't know, but it gave her hope. And she trusted in what God had shown her. Eventually, she gained back her strength, and she pursued those visions. Now, what would science make of Lauren's visions? Perhaps science would declare that her visions were just some aspect of her illness. Now, Lauren believes otherwise, for she knows in whom she trusts. I suspect that even if science could prove that her visions were something from her illness, that Lauren would still say that they came from God. And why not? Isn't God the master of the universe and of all the rules? How could science describe the Transfiguration? It would be interesting to know the details, but in the end, all that is important is Jesus. It is enough to know that Jesus knows. So like the microscopic world all around us, there is also a spiritual realm that is just as close. Science at the moment can see some of that microscopic world, but the spiritual realm, it remains just beyond our senses. As Jesus once noted, we must be born again with spiritual eyes to see that which is spiritual. So who do we believe? The scientists who say it doesn't exist because we can't see it? Or someone who's been there and tells us how we can go and see it too? And beyond that, has been vouched for by God the Father. This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him. If Sir Francis Drake had not brought back evidence of his trip, would Queen Elizabeth have believed that he had done it? I don't know. But it doesn't matter because he did. Today we remember him and we name places after him, and we name buildings for him because he succeeded. I often wonder sometimes why it is so difficult for us to believe in Jesus. Yes, he died an ignoble death on a cross, but he succeeded too. During his time on earth, he performed numerous miracles. He healed thousands of people. He raised the dead. He turned water into wine. He transfigured before 3 of his disciples. And ultimately, he came back from the dead. He even showed his disciples how, through prayer, they could do all of those things and more. If that was not enough, consider all that the church has accomplished in over 2,000 years. Despite being filled with broken and messed up people, and we are all broken and messed up people, it has built hospitals, freed slaves, comforted prisoners, built free nations, encouraged science, and in so many other ways transfigured civilization. No, we cannot prove the existence of a spiritual realm today. But through prayer, perhaps someday, we will have the tools to do so. But maybe by then, it won't matter because we'll already be there. Transformed from glory to glory, may God bless us with eyes to see the wonders of His universe and reflect it back at each other. And may we live for a day when our eyes will be our guides. Amen.